Karoline Leavitt stepped into the Capital Luxury Motors showroom in Washington, D.C., the cool chime of the glass door marking her entrance into a world of gleaming opulence and unspoken judgments. It was a late afternoon when she arrived, a time when the soft, diffused sunlight danced off the polished surfaces of expensive cars and marble floors. Dressed in a crisp white button-up shirt, impeccably tailored black dress pants, and low, confident heels, Karoline exuded a quiet authority that belied the chaos she'd left behind at the White House. Around her neck hung a subtle MAGA necklace, a small but unmistakable symbol of her conservative convictions, amid an environment that prided itself on progressive elitism. Her eyes were fixed on the Azure Coupe, a midnight blue masterpiece with sharp, assertive lines and a price tag of $285,000. It was more than just a car to her. It was a statement that she, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history under the Trump administration, was not here to be diminished by liberal snobbery. The showroom was a temple of luxury, filled with gleaming Porsches, Bentleys, and Ferraris, each a testament to wealth and refined taste. Yet beneath the shimmering surface, Karoline sensed an undercurrent of disdain for someone like her. With every step she took, memories of her previous encounters with the liberal management of this establishment resurfaced. But today, determination burned in her eyes. A young employee named Daniel, no more than 25 and clad in a slightly oversized suit that made him appear both eager and nervous, approached her timidly. "Hello, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Karoline's reply was calm, measured, a blend of firmness and cool authority. "I'd like to see the Azure Coupe," she stated, her hand gesturing towards the sleek vehicle that seemed to embody the very essence of her ambitions. Daniel nodded, stepping forward as though to bridge the gap between her world and the world of luxury that lay before her. Before Daniel could detail the car's specifications, the V8 engine, the hand-stitched leather interior, the promise of a ride that combined power with refinement, a tall figure emerged from the shadows of the showroom. Blake Thompson, the sales manager, was a man in his 40s who prided himself on his expensive gray suit and perfectly slicked-back hair. His eyes, however, betrayed a different quality, smugness mixed with a touch of disdain. He fixed Karoline with a lingering, judgmental stare that chilled the air even more than the conditioned temperature of the showroom. "I'm Blake Thompson, manager here," he said, his voice oozing false sweetness as if sugar could mask his true sentiments. "What are you looking for today?" Karoline repeated her request without hesitation. "I want to see the Azure Coupe." A sneer played across Blake's lips as he stepped between her and the car, his tone laced with mockery. "You're sure about this? This is a limited edition, certainly not for just anyone." His words were meant to belittle her, to remind her that she didn't quite belong. The murmur of nearby customers and staff who had begun to pay attention added an extra weight to his condescension. Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly. "I know exactly what it is," she said, in a tone that was both controlled and steely. "I want to see the interior." Yet Blake wasn't finished. His eyes flicked around, ensuring that his remarks were heard. "You look familiar," he said, tilting his head as if recalling a distant memory. "Oh, I remember now. You're Karoline Leavitt, Trump's press secretary." His voice rose as if the mere mention of the president were a curse. "Trump, huh? I never thought someone like you would be interested in luxury cars." A few hushed chuckles erupted from those nearby. Even Daniel's face flushed with embarrassment as he looked down, clearly uncomfortable with Karoline's response was measured, her voice calm but laced with quiet fury. "I want to see the Azure Coupe. I need it for work, between press briefings and White House events. It's essential." The words, though softly spoken, carried the weight of her dedication. "Money should speak for itself," she added, her tone a firm rebuttal to his insinuations. Blake's smirk deepened as he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a patronizing whisper. "Listen, Miss Leavitt, I'm not sure where you get your money from. Probably MAGA donations, right? This isn't Capital Luxury Motors for people like you. His words were a calculated attempt to humiliate her, to remind everyone in the room that she was an outsider in this world of refined tastes and progressive ideals. A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of disbelief and quiet amusement. Karoline's fists clenched momentarily, though she maintained her composure. I'm a customer, she stated firmly. I have money, and I demand to see the car I'm interested in. The challenge in her tone was unmistakable. A challenge not just to Blake's authority, but to the entire ethos of the establishment. Your personal biases have no place here. Blake's face hardened as he took a step back, his eyes narrowing. Look, Miss Leavitt, if you want a car, you need to book an appointment like everyone else. This isn't a place for your kind of theatrics. His voice, now edged with a warning, reverberated around the showroom. If you can't handle that, then maybe you should try Tesla. Perhaps their electric cars will suit your sensibilities better. The showroom's atmosphere grew increasingly tense, as whispers spread like wildfire among the onlookers. A middle-aged man near the Bentley leaned towards his wife, asking softly, "Who is she?" His wife, eyes wide with both curiosity and a hint of judgment, replied, "That's the press secretary, isn't she? I think I've seen her on TV." Another salesperson, sporting dyed blonde hair and an amused smirk, whispered to a colleague, "Blake's really teaching her a lesson today." Meanwhile, Daniel remained rooted in his spot, his expression one of silent sorrow, as if he wished he could somehow undo the unfolding scene. Karoline took a deep breath, her gaze never wavering from the man before her. "I don't need your suggestions," she said, her voice low but resonant. "I'm here to buy the Azure Coupe. I have no time for petty ideological games." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the LED lights overhead and the distant murmur of a luxury advertisement playing from the speakers. Blake's eyes flickered, and though he tried to maintain his superiority, a trace of uncertainty crept into his expression. I'm afraid I'm not sure this car fits your image," he stuttered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "What do you plan to do with it exactly?" Karoline's eyes flashed with a quiet, determined fire. "It's not about the image," she retorted. "It's about doing my job efficiently. I represent millions, and I won't be dismissed simply because of my beliefs." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of indignation and amusement rippling through the air. Blake's posture stiffened, his arrogance momentarily faltering in the face of her unyielding resolve. As the tension reached its zenith, Karoline's voice dropped even further, becoming almost a whisper, yet carrying clearly to all within earshot. "If you want me gone, then do your worst. But remember, this is my turf now, whether you like it or not." The words, both defiant and poised, hung in the air, marking a turning point in the showdown. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause as if time itself. Unable to withstand the mounting pressure, Karoline turned sharply on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking assertively on the marble floor. The doors slid closed behind her, leaving behind a stunned silence and a palpable sense of injustice. Blake laughed, a harsh, derisive sound that echoed off the walls, but deep down, he knew he had underestimated her resolve. The following morning, as Washington awoke to a crisp, determined dawn, a fiery red Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of the showroom. The deep, throaty rumble of its engine seemed to signal that this day would not be ordinary. The back door of the vehicle swung open, and Blake Thompson froze in place, his eyes widening in shock as he stared at the man stepping out. Nicholas Riccio, Karoline's husband, a self-made titan whose past struggles had forged him into the formidable figure he was today, stepped forward with a calm, unyielding authority. At 59, Nicholas bore the marks of a life hard won. His salt and pepper hair, the lingering scars of his once humble beginnings, and his piercing gaze all spoke of a man who had clawed his way from homelessness to building a multi-million-dollar real estate empire in New England. Blake's confidence crumbled in the face of Nicholas's presence. The showroom, which had moments before buzzed with condescension and whispered judgments, now fell into a heavy silence. Nicholas's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the air as he addressed Blake with a cool, measured tone. "I'm Nicholas Riccio," he declared, his eyes never leaving the man who had insulted his wife. "I'm here to address the treatment you dished out to Karoline Leavitt. Your refusal to serve her simply because of your personal biases and political Blake's mouth opened and closed in a feeble attempt at an apology, but the words died on his tongue. The customers in the showroom, who had been recording the earlier incident on their phones or whispering amongst themselves, now focused all their attention on the unfolding confrontation. Nicholas's presence, backed by the imposing image of the red Rolls-Royce Phantom, transformed the dynamic completely. Every word he spoke was laced with both the pride of his achievements and the righteous anger of someone who had seen his loved one humiliated. "Yesterday," Nicholas continued, his tone both stern and controlled, "you referred to my wife's money as dirty and told her she didn't belong here because of her political affiliations. You cast judgment on her not on the merits of her character or her work, but solely on her beliefs. I'm here to tell you that I will not stand for that kind of behavior." His voice resonated through the showroom, reverberating off the glass and marble as he walked slowly toward the pedestal where the midnight blue azure coupe rested. Blake, now visibly shaking, tried to muster some semblance of dignity. "Mr. Riccio, I didn't mean any harm. It was just—" he stammered, but Nicholas cut him off with a look that silenced any further excuses. "Save your excuses," Nicholas said coldly. "I am here to buy that car for my wife, and I expect her to be treated with the respect she deserves. Not only will I complete this purchase today, but I also demand that you learn that no one has the right to humiliate a customer on the basis of political beliefs." In that moment, the showroom seemed to shrink around them. Daniel, the young employee who had earlier looked downcast, now watched with wide, uncertain eyes, silently wishing he could bridge the gap between the man with the Rolls-Royce and the one who had wronged Karoline. Nicholas's voice, imbued with the quiet fury of someone who had once known hardship firsthand, echoed as he recalled his own past. "I, too, had nothing once. I slept on park benches until I built Riccio Enterprises from scratch. I understand what it means to struggle, and I know the value of hard-earned money. But I also know that no one, regardless of their background or beliefs, should ever be disrespected." Blake attempted a weak laugh, but it fell flat. "This is a private business," he mumbled, trying to regain control of the situation. "I decide who we serve. I'm not going to let my establishment be tainted by—" He was cut off by Nicholas's icy glare. "Your right to choose ends when you use that right to demean and humiliate others," Nicholas replied sharply. "I'm not here to play your petty games. I'm here to purchase the Azure Coupe because my wife needs it for her work. And as for your so-called social awareness, it seems to have blinded you to the fact that respect is not something that can be selectively granted." The words hung in the air, each syllable a deliberate strike against the veneer of superiority that Blake had so carefully cultivated. At that moment, Richard Mason, the owner of the dealership, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an anxious demeanor, stepped forward from the back office. "Hello," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he tried to diffuse the situation. "I'm Richard Mason. Is there a problem here?" Nicholas's gaze did not waver as he pointed at the Azure Coupe. "The problem," he stated, "is that my wife, Karoline Leavitt, was humiliated in your showroom yesterday. You refused her service, insulting her on the basis of her political beliefs, and I'm here to make sure that—" Blake's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I apologize," he tried to say, but his voice was weak in the presence of Nicholas's unwavering stare. "We can get the paperwork done immediately," Richard interjected, trying to salvage the situation. "The Azure coupe will be delivered within 24 hours. Nicholas's eyes narrowed as he accepted the stack of documents from Daniel, scrutinizing them before signing his name with swift determination. "I'm buying this car," he declared, "not to make you happy, but because my wife deserves the best. And if you think for 1 second that your liberal ideals give you the right to disrespect her, then you're gravely mistaken." Blake's protests were drowned out by the weight of the moment. "I have the right to choose my customers," he insisted weakly. But Nicholas's voice rose once more, each word a measured rebuke. "Your right ends when your choices turn into blatant discrimination. You insulted my wife by calling her money dirty, by suggesting she didn't belong in this place because of her beliefs. That's not the sort of behavior that belongs in a dealership that prides itself on luxury and sophistication." As Nicholas's words reverberated through the now silent showroom, the tension seemed to ease just slightly, replaced by the heavy realization that something fundamental had shifted. The customers, once content with hushed whispers and amused glances, now regarded Nicholas with a mixture of respect and contemplation. Even Daniel, who had been trapped in a state of anxious silence, lifted his eyes in a gesture that hinted at newfound admiration. Outside, the fiery red Rolls-Royce Phantom sat as a symbol of defiance and power. Its gleaming body and luxurious aura were not just a means of transportation, but a statement, a promise that those who dared to belittle others would soon face the consequences of their arrogance. Nicholas's gaze wandered briefly to the car, its presence a silent reminder of his own journey from obscurity to power. And then he turned back to Blake with steely resolve. "You thought you could win by humiliating my wife," Nicholas said, his tone low and dangerous. "But let me assure you, your victory is short-lived. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I will be back here. Not only will I collect this car, but I will also see to it that you understand the real meaning of accountability. You will attend the Veterans Fundraiser Gala that Karoline is hosting next month, not as a guest, but as a volunteer. An opportunity for you to meet the very people you so disdain, to witness firsthand the worth and dignity of those you sought to belittle." Blake's face turned ashen as the implications sank in. The idea that he would be forced to confront the very clientele he had so arrogantly dismissed was more than he could bear. "Volunteer?" he repeated, his voice a mix of incredulity and fear. I don't think you understand." "No," Nicholas cut in sharply, his eyes locking onto Blake's trembling gaze. "I understand perfectly. You used your power to demean my wife. I'm not here to ruin you financially or force you into bankruptcy, at least not yet. But I am here to ensure that your actions do not go unchallenged. Your right to decide who walks through these doors ends when you use it to attack someone's dignity. And mark my words, there will be consequences." Richard Mason, trying to salvage what remained of the situation, interjected, "Mr. Riccio, let's handle this professionally. I guarantee the Azure Coupe will be delivered as agreed. We value all our customers." But Nicholas's eyes never left Blake. "I value my wife's dignity far more than any profit margin. Do not mistake my calm for weakness," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had built his empire from sheer determination and resilience. With the paperwork signed and the terms clear, Nicholas took one last, lingering look at Blake, a look that spoke volumes of the personal vendetta that had just been ignited. "You thought you could define who was worthy by your own standards," he murmured, more to himself than to Blake. "Well, today you've learned that respect is earned, not given, and that your narrow view of social awareness is nothing more than an excuse for your own insecurities." As Nicholas strode toward the exit, leaving behind a silence heavy with contemplation and regret, the cameras of a few onlookers captured every moment. The defiant walk of a man who refused to be cowed by prejudice, the trembling form of a salesman whose arrogance had been shattered, and the resolute expression on Karoline's face as she watched from a distance, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and determination. Later that day, as Karoline drove away in her old silver Toyota Camry, a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury around her, her mind replayed the events of the morning in vivid detail. The hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the pavement provided a backdrop to her swirling thoughts. She thought of the insults, the whispered judgments, and the undeniable truth that had been forced upon everyone in that showroom, that money, ambition, and hard work transcended any political label. As the evening light deepened and the city's skyline flickered to life, Karoline found solace in the quiet of her home. The confrontation had left her with a sense of vindication and a resolve that only grew stronger with each passing moment. She knew that tomorrow, when Nicholas returned to Capital Luxury Motors, the fallout would not just be a personal victory, but a statement, a declaration that dignity and respect could not be bartered away by prejudice or elitism. The next morning, as promised, the sun rose over Washington, D.C., bathing the city in a golden light that seemed to herald a new chapter. The showroom of Capital Luxury Motors was abuzz with activity, yet there was an undercurrent of anticipation and anxiety that hung in the air. Blake Thompson, pale and visibly shaken, paced near the entrance as staff and customers alike exchanged uneasy glances. He had spent the night in restless contemplation, haunted by the memory of Karoline's defiant words and the specter of Nicholas Riccio. At precisely 10 a.m., the deep rumble of an engine announced the arrival of the fiery red Rolls-Royce Phantom once again. Heads turned and whispers filled the space as Nicholas Riccio stepped out of the car. He was dressed impeccably in a dark gray suit that accentuated his authoritative presence, his eyes cold and determined. Without hesitation, he strode into the showroom, his gaze locking immediately onto Blake, who stood rooted in place. The silence that followed was thick with expectation. Every person in the room felt that the moment was far more than a simple business transaction. It was a reckoning. "Good morning," Nicholas said in a voice that carried both authority and quiet fury. "I'm here to finalize the purchase of the Azure Coupe for Karoline Leavitt." His tone brooked no argument, and even the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. Richard Mason hurried forward, clutching the necessary documents as Daniel looked on with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Blake attempted to speak, but his voice faltered as Nicholas's steely gaze pinned him in place. "Yesterday, you humiliated my wife in front of everyone," Nicholas continued, his voice measured but cutting through the room like a blade. "You claimed that she didn't belong here because of who she is, a MAGA supporter, the press secretary, and a woman with her own identity. That was not only unprofessional, it was uncalled for. Today, I expect nothing less than an apology and the proper service my wife deserves." His words were met with a collective intake of breath, as if the very air in the showroom had been purged of its usual frivolity. Blake's eyes darted around, seeking support from his colleagues, but found none willing to stand up. His mouth opened, then closed again as he struggled to muster a response. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to offend." But Nicholas was not satisfied with mere words. "Apologies alone won't mend the damage," he said. "I'm here not just to buy a car, but to send a message. Discrimination and arrogance have no place in this world, and I will see that you and this establishment learn that lesson." Richard Mason, eager to diffuse the situation, interjected again. "Mr. Riccio, please, let's complete the paperwork. The Azure Coupe is ready, and I assure you, this will not happen again." But Nicholas's focus remained on Blake. "You have one chance to make this right," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Show me that you understand the gravity of your actions. I expect to see you at the Veterans Fundraiser Gala next month. Not as a guest, but as someone who is willing to learn humility and respect from those you so arrogantly dismissed." The words, meant to sting and instruct in equal measure, brought a heavy silence over the room. With the document signed and the sale finalized, Nicholas gave one last piercing look at Blake, a look that conveyed both warning and finality. Then, with a measured nod to Richard Mason, he turned and exited the showroom, the heavy doors closing behind him with a resonant finality that echoed his resolve. As the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers of admiration for his stand mingled with the undeniable tension that lingered in the air. Later that day, as Karoline returned home and recounted the morning's events to a close-knit group of friends and colleagues over a quiet dinner, the narrative shifted from one of humiliation to one of empowerment. The story of her confrontation at Capital Luxury Motors spread quickly, shared on social media, discussed in hushed tones among conservative circles, and even picked up by sympathetic media outlets. What had begun as an isolated incident of discrimination had blossomed into a rallying cry for respect and equality, a reminder that personal dignity was not up for negotiation. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of that morning were felt far and wide. Blake Thompson's reputation suffered, as whispers of his discriminatory behavior spread among potential clients and within industry circles. Some customers refused to do business with a dealership that allowed such arrogance to persist, while others quietly congratulated Nicholas Riccio for his decisive stand. Karoline, too, found herself bolstered by the support of those who believed in her right to be treated with the same respect as any other customer. The incident became a defining moment, a turning point in her career, as well as in the broader conversation about political bias in luxury establishments. As the Veterans Fundraiser Gala approached, Nicholas prepared meticulously. He knew that his attendance as a volunteer was not merely symbolic. It was a tangible reminder to those who held power that accountability was inevitable. The gala, held at the prestigious Grand Hyatt Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C., was a dazzling affair. American flags, MAGA banners, and patriotic decor set the stage for an event where veterans, their families, and conservative donors mingled with a sense of shared purpose. Karoline, elegant in a navy business dress that accentuated both her professional poise and personal defiance, took the stage to address the crowd. Her speech, calm, articulate, and filled with the conviction of someone who had fought for every bit of respect she received, resonated deeply with the audience. Throughout the evening, Nicholas moved among the guests, ensuring that even the most skeptical observers understood the message. Arrogance and discrimination, no matter how subtle, would be met with unwavering resolve. Blake, forced to attend as part of his restitution, wore his humiliation like a second skin. The experience was a humbling one, a lesson in the real cost of prejudice. For those in attendance, it was a reminder that the values of dignity, respect, and equality were worth defending at all costs. By the end of the gala, as the lights dimmed and the last echoes of patriotic music faded into the night, the impact of that fateful day at Capital Luxury Motors had become undeniable. Karoline Leavitt's courage had not only reclaimed her personal dignity, but had ignited a broader conversation about the treatment of individuals based on their beliefs. Nicholas Riccio's quiet, resolute stand had shown that true power lies not in the ability to dismiss others, but in the willingness to fight for what is right. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to unfold. Conservative media outlets amplified the narrative, hailing it as a victory for respect and accountability. Supporters of Karoline found in her story a rallying point, a symbol of perseverance in the face of elitist disdain. Meanwhile, the dealership struggled to recover from the public relations disaster that had unfolded within its walls. Blake Thompson's career, once marked by unyielding arrogance, now served as a cautionary tale for others who might be tempted to let personal biases override professional. For Karoline, however, the real victory was personal. The incident had solidified her resolve and deepened her commitment to serving as a beacon of strength in a polarized world. Every time she passed by a luxury showroom or encountered an attempt to belittle her worth, she would recall the moment when her silence transformed into an unstoppable force, a reminder that her voice, her beliefs, and her determination were as valuable as any symbol of wealth. In the end, what began as a confrontation over a car had evolved into a broader narrative about dignity, respect, and the enduring power of standing up for one's principles. Karoline's journey, intertwined with the rise of a man who had turned personal hardship into an unbreakable resolve, became a testament to the idea that even in a world defined by luxury and elitism, the courage to demand equality can transform lives and shift entire paradigms. As Washington, D.C. continued its relentless pace and the echoes of that fateful morning faded into memory, one thing remained crystal clear. True power is not measured by wealth or status, but by the unwavering conviction to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. And in that moment, as the city prepared for another day, the legacy of Karoline Leavitt and Nicholas Riccio would live on. A legacy defined not by the fleeting opinions of a narrow-minded few, but by the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be diminished by prejudice, and who continue to fight for a world where respect is